You ever notice how a mysterious story becomes more exciting the moment someone tells you you're not supposed to know? Suddenly everybody wants the file, the password, the locked drawer, the little secret nobody was meant to see. But let's bring this back to reality for a second, because powerful families and private databases make a great headline. But real power doesn't need a fantasy conspiracy to be intimidating. The real question is much more uncomfortable. What if the people you think are ignoring you are actually noticing your choices, your discipline, your work, and the way you're changing? Not because some secret family has your name on a mysterious list, but because your actions are becoming visible. That's the part nobody wants to talk about. You keep thinking nobody is watching, so you keep building quietly. You keep improving while everyone else is busy judging the version of you they already know. You learn a skill. You become disciplined. You stop announcing your plans. You start making smarter decisions. And eventually people who dismissed you begin asking questions. Where did this come from? Who helped you? What changed? Suddenly your progress looks like a secret because they weren't paying attention while it was being built. That's the real database, the evidence created by your own behavior. Every promise you kept. Every difficult morning you showed up. Every opportunity you didn't waste. Every time you refused to return to the version of yourself that was easier to control. You don't need a mysterious organization to validate your importance. You need results that make your old limitations impossible to believe, while you keep moving quietly enough that the people who underestimated you only notice the transformation after it has already become difficult to ignore, leaving them searching for an explanation when the truth was sitting in front of them the entire time, hidden not inside some secret file, but inside the discipline, choices, and work you were making when nobody thought it mattered. Forget the secret explanations for a moment. People love a mystery because it gives them something dramatic to blame when they don't understand someone's progress. If you're improving, they want to know who helped you, what shortcut you discovered, what hidden advantage you had, as if ordinary discipline couldn't possibly produce extraordinary results. That's almost adorable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Your progress doesn't need a secret organization, a mysterious database, or some powerful person pulling strings behind the curtain. Sometimes the explanation is much simpler, and somehow that's more disturbing. You worked. You learned. You failed. You adjusted. You kept going when nobody was impressed. You made decisions that were boring, difficult, and invisible, and eventually those decisions started producing results people could actually see. That's how real transformation happens. Not through fantasy. Through repetition. You don't need to invent enemies to make your journey important. You don't need to believe everyone is watching you to justify your ambition. And you definitely don't need to convince yourself that every coincidence is evidence that powerful people are secretly tracking your life. That's where imagination can become a trap. It feels exciting to believe there's some hidden explanation, but sometimes that belief distracts you from the explanation that actually matters: your own choices. Look at what you've done recently. Have you become more disciplined? Have you learned something valuable? Have you stopped wasting as much time? Have you become more selective about who gets your attention? Have you started keeping promises to yourself? Those things matter far more than some imaginary secret file, because every action leaves evidence. Every time you show up when you could have quit, you're building evidence. Every time you choose patience over impulse, you're building evidence. Every time you improve a skill, instead of complaining about your circumstances, you're building evidence. Nobody needs to secretly record it for it to matter. You are recording it through your habits. And eventually habits become reputation. Reputation becomes opportunity. Opportunity becomes responsibility. That's how the world actually works. And it's far less glamorous than a conspiracy story, which is probably why people don't talk about it as much. They want the dramatic explanation, because it lets them avoid the boring work. If success is controlled by some invisible group, then they don't have to ask whether their own habits are holding them back. If someone else has a secret advantage, they don't have to examine their preparation. It's easier to blame a hidden system than to admit you spent 6 hours scrolling when you could have spent 1 hour learning something useful. But you don't need that excuse anymore. You can take your power back by focusing on what you can actually control. Your attention, your discipline, your choices, your skills, your response to setbacks, your willingness to begin again. Those are real advantages. And unlike a fantasy secret, nobody can take them away simply by refusing to acknowledge them. Let people misunderstand your progress. Let them wonder why you've become different. Let them search for complicated explanations if they want to. You don't have to join them. Stay grounded. Stay curious. Stay skeptical when someone presents you with dramatic claims without evidence. And keep building something real enough that you don't need a mysterious story to make it impressive, because eventually the strongest explanation for your transformation will be sitting directly in front of everyone. Not hidden behind a locked door, not stored inside some private database, not controlled by strangers in expensive rooms, but visible in the discipline you developed, the skills you earned, the mistakes you survived, the boundaries you established, and the work you continued doing long before anyone else decided it was worth paying attention to, leaving you with something far more powerful than a secret explanation proof that your own choices were capable of changing the direction of your life, one decision after another, while everyone else was busy searching for someone behind the curtain to explain what you had already built with your own hands. Build quietly while everyone else is busy judging the version of you they think they already understand. There's a strange advantage in not announcing every move you make. You don't have to tell the world what you're planning before you've actually done it. You don't need to post every goal, explain every decision, or ask 10 people whether they think your idea is good enough. Sometimes you simply need to work, quietly, consistently, without turning your progress into a public vote. Because the moment you announce every intention, you invite every opinion, someone will tell you it's impossible. Someone else will tell you it's unrealistic. Another person will explain why they tried something similar and failed. And suddenly you're spending more energy defending an idea than building it. Wonderful. Your dream becomes a debate before it even becomes a project. That's why quiet progress can be powerful. You protect the early stage. You give yourself room to make mistakes without an audience. You can experiment, adjust, learn, and start over without feeling like the entire world is watching you fail. Failure becomes information instead of embarrassment. You don't have to pretend you know everything. You can be a beginner. You can ask questions. You can change your approach. You can discover that the first plan wasn't very good and replace it with a better one. That's how real work happens. Not through constant performance, but through private repetition. And here's the part people often misunderstand. Building quietly doesn't mean hiding forever. It means allowing the work to become stronger before demanding attention for it. You can share results when you're ready. You can celebrate milestones. You can appreciate the people who supported you. But you don't need to turn every tiny step into an announcement. Let your actions become louder than your promises. If you're learning a skill, practice. If you're building a business, serve customers. If you're improving your health, follow the routine. If you're writing, write. If you're saving money, save. If you're changing your mindset, prove it through your behavior. That's much harder to fake than a motivational speech. People can ignore words. They can question intentions. They can laugh at plans. But consistent results are difficult to argue with. And when someone judges you based on the person you used to be, you don't have to correct them immediately. Let them keep their outdated opinion while you continue becoming someone different. Maybe they think you're still the person who procrastinated. Fine, Work anyway. Maybe they think you won't follow through. Fine. Follow through. Maybe they think you're dreaming too big. Fine. Build the smaller steps that eventually create the bigger result. You don't need to win the argument today. You need to build the evidence over time. That's the difference between seeking validation and creating value. Validation asks, "Do you believe in me?" Value says, "Watch what I produce." And there is something freeing about that shift. You stop needing constant applause. You stop checking whether everyone likes your direction. You become more comfortable with being misunderstood, because you know that your responsibility is to live your values, not manage everyone's opinion. Of course, stay open to useful feedback. Quiet doesn't mean stubborn. Listen to people who have earned your trust. Learn from experience. Change when the evidence tells you to change. But don't let random criticism become the steering wheel of your life. Your focus is too valuable to hand over to every voice that has an opinion, while you continue building in the background, allowing discipline to become routine, routine to become progress, and progress to become results that eventually speak so clearly that you no longer need to explain what you were doing during all those quiet months when nobody seemed to understand why you kept going. Because the work itself becomes the answer, visible in your skills, your decisions, your confidence, and the life you're gradually creating without needing permission from everyone watching from the sidelines. Your actions create your reputation, long before you realize people are paying attention. And that's the funny thing about reputation. You don't get to manufacture it with one impressive speech. You build it through patterns. People may forget what you said last Tuesday, but they remember whether you kept your promise. They remember whether you showed up. They remember whether you handled pressure responsibly or disappeared the moment things became difficult. You can talk about discipline all day, but eventually your schedule reveals the truth. You can talk about confidence, but your decisions reveal whether you trust yourself. You can talk about loyalty, but your behavior reveals who you stand beside when things become inconvenient. That's why every ordinary choice matters more than people think. You are constantly leaving evidence behind. Not secret evidence hidden in some mysterious system, but evidence visible through the way you live. When you consistently arrive on time, people notice reliability. When you finish what you start, people notice commitment. When you admit mistakes instead of blaming everyone else, people notice maturity. When you remain calm under pressure, people notice emotional control. When you treat people with respect, even when you don't need anything from them, people notice character. None of this requires you to announce yourself as a good person. In fact, announcing it too much can have the opposite effect. If you have to keep telling everyone you're trustworthy, eventually people start wondering why the evidence isn't doing the talking. That's the problem with trying to control your reputation directly. You can't force people to believe something about you forever. You can only give them enough consistent evidence to form their own conclusion. And yes, some people will misunderstand you anyway. That's unavoidable. You could behave perfectly, and someone would still find a reason to criticize you. Congratulations, you've discovered the internet. But you don't need universal approval. What you need is alignment between what you say and what you repeatedly do. That's where credibility comes from. If you say you're going to improve, improve. If you say you're going to learn, learn. If you say you're going to change a habit, create systems that make that change possible. If you tell someone you'll help, follow through when it's reasonable. And if you can't follow through, communicate honestly instead of disappearing. These small behaviors accumulate until people develop expectations about you. They begin to trust you with responsibilities. They recommend you. They seek your opinion. They notice when you're absent, not because you're famous, but because you've become dependable. That's a much more powerful form of influence than attention. Attention can disappear tomorrow. Character travels with you. And here's another important part: reputation isn't just about how other people see you. It's also about how you see yourself. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you strengthen self-trust. Every time you break one without caring, you weaken it. That's why your private behavior matters. Nobody may know whether you actually completed the task, stayed disciplined, or followed the plan, but you know. And that knowledge becomes part of your identity. You start becoming someone who believes their own commitments because you've collected evidence that you follow through. That's real confidence. Not pretending you're perfect, but knowing that your behavior generally matches your intentions. So stop obsessing over what people think and start paying attention to what your actions are teaching them. If you want to be respected, become respectable through your conduct. If you want to be trusted, become trustworthy through repetition. If you want opportunities, become capable enough to handle them when they arrive. And if you want your transformation to be undeniable, stop explaining who you're becoming and start living like that person consistently, because eventually your habits will introduce you before you ever say a word. Your discipline will speak before your confidence does, and your reputation will become the natural result of hundreds of small decisions that nobody considered important at the time, until those decisions accumulated into a character strong enough that people could feel the difference without needing you to announce it, leaving your actions to tell the story more convincingly than any secret label, dramatic claim, or carefully written explanation ever could, while you continue becoming the kind of person whose behavior creates opportunities because people know what to expect when your name appears in the room. Not because some mysterious authority placed it somewhere, but because you earned that recognition through what you repeatedly chose to do when nobody was forcing you to do it. There comes a moment when you stop trying to convince people that you're capable and start becoming so consistent that the evidence does the arguing for you. That's a much more dangerous kind of confidence because it doesn't depend on applause. You don't need someone to tell you you're talented before you practice. You don't need someone to believe in your business before you improve it. You don't need someone to call you disciplined before you start keeping promises to yourself. You simply work, and eventually the results begin creating a problem for everyone who underestimated you. Suddenly the person they thought was ordinary is producing something they can't easily dismiss. Funny how quickly people change their vocabulary when the evidence arrives. Yesterday it was, "You probably can't do it." Today it's, "I always knew you had potential." Amazing memory. But don't let that transformation become about proving them wrong. That's another trap. If your entire motivation is revenge, then the people who doubted you still control you. You're still waking up thinking about them. You're still measuring your success by their reaction. That's not freedom. Real progress happens when you stop needing their disbelief to fuel you. You build because you decided your life deserved better. You learn because you want to become capable. You improve because you respect your potential. You take responsibility because you don't want your future controlled by old habits. The results are simply the consequence, and results matter because they turn possibilities into evidence. Talking about what you might do is easy. Doing it consistently is where things become real. You can tell everyone you're going to write a book, start a company, learn a skill, become healthier, or change your life. Wonderful. The world has heard millions of promises. What it hasn't seen is whether you'll still be doing the work 3 months later when the excitement has disappeared. That's the test. Anyone can make a dramatic beginning. The rare person keeps going when the beginning stops being exciting. That's why your goal should be to become undeniable through repetition rather than impressive through announcements. Improve one skill, solve one problem, finish one project, learn from one failure, then repeat. You don't need to become extraordinary overnight. You need to become slightly better often enough that the difference eventually becomes impossible to ignore. And when people notice, Don't become distracted by the attention. Attention can be addictive. One compliment can make you chase 10 more. One viral moment can make you desperate to recreate it. One successful result can make you believe you've already arrived. Stay grounded. The work that created the result still matters after everyone stops clapping. That's the part many people forget. Success doesn't eliminate the need for discipline. Sometimes it increases it. Now you have something worth protecting. Now you have responsibilities. Now you have opportunities that require you to remain capable. So keep your standards. Keep learning. Keep questioning your assumptions. Keep improving the weak areas you would rather ignore. Let people notice you because of what you produce, not because of how loudly you announce yourself. And if someone still refuses to acknowledge your progress, that's fine. You don't need to drag them toward the evidence. Some people would rather protect an old opinion than admit they were wrong. Let them. Your job isn't to win every person's approval. Your job is to become so aligned with your values and so consistent in your actions that your life itself becomes the explanation. Because eventually the strongest answer to doubt isn't an argument, a confrontation, or a dramatic speech, but a body of work, a record of discipline, a history of decisions, and a pattern of results that quietly tells everyone what you're capable of without requiring you to stand there, begging them to believe you. While the people who once questioned your potential are left with the simplest conclusion available. Whatever changed, you built it through what you did repeatedly, when nobody was paying attention. And that's the kind of proof that doesn't need permission to exist, doesn't need a mysterious story attached to it, and doesn't disappear just because somebody refuses to admit they were wrong. You don't need to become a mystery to everyone else. You need to become clear to yourself, and that's where the real transformation begins. People can spend hours trying to figure out why you've changed, who influenced you, what happened behind the scenes, or why you suddenly seem more focused, more disciplined, and less interested in explaining yourself. Let them wonder. You have something more important to figure out. What kind of person are you becoming? And what are you willing to do consistently to become that person? Because transformation isn't about creating an image that confuses everyone around you. It's about creating a life that makes sense to you. You don't need to perform strength. You need to practice it. You don't need to announce discipline. You need to live it. You don't need to convince people you're confident. You need to make decisions without requiring constant approval. That's the difference between appearance and character. Appearance depends on an audience. Character survives without one. And maybe that's why your growth becomes more powerful when you stop trying to make people notice it. You're no longer checking who liked the change. You're no longer waiting for someone to say, "Wow, you've really improved." You're simply doing the work because you know it matters. You start protecting your attention. You become careful about what you consume, who you listen to, and what kind of conversations you allow to occupy your mind. You stop feeding every argument. You stop explaining every boundary. You stop chasing people who repeatedly demonstrate that they don't value your presence. Not because you hate them, but because you finally understand the cost of constantly giving energy to things that don't move your life forward. And that clarity becomes its own form of power. You know what you're working toward. You know what you're willing to tolerate. You know what you're no longer willing to sacrifice. That doesn't make you perfect. You'll still make mistakes. You'll still have bad days. You'll still question yourself. But now you have a direction, and direction matters more than speed. You can move slowly and still be moving forward. You can take a break without abandoning the mission. You can change the plan without abandoning the goal. You can admit you were wrong without deciding you're worthless. That's what sustainable growth looks like. It's flexible without being weak. It's disciplined without being obsessive. It's confident without becoming arrogant. And when people finally notice the difference, you don't need to give them a dramatic explanation. Your life already contains the explanation. The habits changed. The priorities changed. The standards changed. The way you respond to pressure changed. The way you treat yourself changed. The way you choose people changed. The way you spend your time changed. Those changes create a different life, because your behavior creates different consequences. That's the part nobody can fake forever. You can pretend for a week. You can perform for an audience. You can post motivational quotes all day, but eventually your habits reveal the truth. So focus on the habits. Build something real. Become reliable. Become capable. Become someone you can trust. Let your reputation develop naturally from what you repeatedly do. And if someone wants to create a dramatic story about your transformation, that's their entertainment. You don't have to participate. You don't need to believe every theory people invent about you. And you don't need to invent theories about yourself either. Stay grounded enough to question exaggerated claims. Stay ambitious enough to keep improving. Stay humble enough to learn. Stay disciplined enough to continue when the excitement disappears. Because the strongest version of you isn't the one who becomes famous for being mysterious. It's the one who becomes so consistent, capable, and self-aware that the old limitations no longer describe them. While the people who remember the old version slowly realize they were never looking at a finished person. They were looking at someone still becoming, someone whose story was being written through ordinary decisions every day. And every time you choose discipline over distraction, integrity over image, growth over comfort, and action over endless explanation, you add another line to that story, until eventually your life becomes the only explanation you need. Not because everyone understands you, but because you finally understand what you're building and why you're willing to keep building it. Even when nobody is watching, nobody is applauding, and nobody is offering you a convenient explanation for why you refuse to stay the person they thought you were.